One thing I've learned over the years is that it's not always as easy as you might think to get a picture of the moon. And I'm not talking from a gear perspective. So anyone can go and get a camera with a long zoom lens and zoom in on the moon and take a picture. And it's even cell phone cameras can do this. If you have like a one of the Samsung Galaxies with I think a couple years ago Samsung came out with one they called a space zoom because it could zoom into the moon. And I don't know, it's not that interesting to me. I don't mean to sound uppity when I say that, but at the end of the day, a picture of a moon is a picture of the moon. In fact, a picture of the moon is so common that there are some cell phones that will fake it. So if you point, depending on what phone you have, if you point it up at the moon and take a picture, it will either enhance it because it knows that it's a picture of the moon. So it will apply like artificial textures and enhancements, even if you don't want them. Or some cell phones will even replace the picture that you took with a picture of the moon that it has in its own database, because it's probably going to be better than the picture that a cell phone can take. And so once you see one picture of the moon with the craters or a crescent or anything, I don't want to say you've seen them all, but they all tend to sort of look the same. And so for me then, and I learned this years ago when I would point my camera up at the moon and take a picture with my zoom lens, my first thought years ago was, hey, this is really cool. Look, I can get a picture of the moon. But then the more I did, the more I was like, these are all the same. Look, another picture of the moon. It's the same as the one I took 2 weeks ago or whatever, a month ago. But what the difference I've learned, the difference with pointing your camera at the moon and taking a picture and going a step beyond is context. And that's what you see here. There are 3 elements to this photo. There's the thin crescent moon, which is pretty cool just on its own. There's also Venus in the sky on the top right. So on the bottom left, you have the moon. On the top right, you have Venus. And then the third element is the tree. And this picture only works because of all 3 of those. So my wife and I were walking home one night. We were just out on a walk, walking home. It was at dusk. And she saw the moon and she's like, man, that's a really pretty moon tonight. And I said, yeah, you're right. And we just talked about it for a little bit. And then when we got home, I said, do you mind if I run down and grab my camera and take a picture? And basically, we have to get our kids ready for bed each night. So I said, do you mind just watching the kids for a minute while I run down and take pictures? She was like, yeah, that's fine. So I grabbed my camera, grabbed my zoom lens. And I knew when I hopped on my bike and left the driveway to take a picture, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Years ago, I would have just stood in my driveway, pointed the camera up, and taken a picture of the moon and called it a day. And it would have been a crescent, and maybe I would have got Venus in there. But what I wanted on that night, the night that I took this picture, was I wanted something else to add a sense of place and context, and maybe even time. I'm not sure. And so I biked down to the corner, and my neighbor has this tall pine tree, and I knew that if I could get something in the frame, in the foreground, to add a sense of context, it would enhance the picture of the moon. It would make it more than just a thin crescent in a blank sky. And that's pretty much what you see here. What I wanted to get is pretty much exactly what I got. The moon, I thought about photoshopping out the tree as kind of an example. Like, look, what would happen if you remove the tree? I didn't do that because I don't know, I don't care that much. But imagine this picture without the tree, and it would just be the moon and Venus against a blank blue sky. And it wouldn't have been bad. It's just kind of uninteresting. That's not that compelling of a photo, a crescent moon and a other tiny little dot. But the tree does a couple things. Number one, it fills the bottom right portion of the frame, so it adds some other element. And in the order, so when you look at this, the first thing that you see likely is the crescent. The second thing you see is probably Venus, although it depends on the size of the screen you're looking. And the third thing you notice is the tree. And maybe you see the tree first because it's so contrasty, but it's just this dark mass. So I don't know if that draws your eye. But the tree in the foreground gives you a sense of where you, the viewer, are in relation to what we're looking at. because it's very clearly a tree, and almost anyone could look at that and recognize it as a tree. And it's the top of the tree, meaning it's probably a tall tree, and you're probably looking up at the tree and then up at the sky. And so when you look at this photo, you can imagine someone standing on the street or on the sidewalk looking up at the moon and Venus. And it gives it a different impact, or it makes a different impact on the viewer as a result. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, if you're going to take a picture of the moon, I recommend trying to find a way to add something else to it, add some context so that it's more than just a circle in the sky.